Welcome to the Content Strategy Interviews podcast. Each week, we talk with accomplished content strategy experts to share their wisdom with our friends in the content community. And now, here's your host, Larry Swanson.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to episode number 26 of the Content Strategy Interviews podcast. I'm really happy today to have with us Joe Welinski. Joe is a real strong figure here in the local Seattle UX community. And he's been a content strategist before we were using the term, since before we were using the term content strategist. He evolved out of the technical communication world in the 80s and 90s and then into the UX world. And along the way has accomplished a lot and done a lot of teaching and other things. So we have a lot to talk about today. So I want to jump right into it. First of all, welcome, Joe. And do you have anything more you'd like to say about your background for the folks?
Well, yeah, thanks, Larry. It's great to be doing this with you. I've enjoyed your previous episodes and guests for this. I hope I can be up to that level of it. But yeah, this is working with content is something that I've done for my whole career, and I've really enjoyed it. Starting back in just deciding what to do for college and liking writing, but also being a real tech geek. And so is English, engineering, probably get a job with engineering. So I went with that. So so I started with industrial engineering at the University of Illinois. And my first job out of college was they needed somebody to be putting together all of the technical information associated with their products. So
nice. Well, so you have the classic background, because my dad was an engineer, my mom was a journalist, and so we kind of there are a lot of the hybrid kind of people like that in this world. So you've had, I think it's safe to say that you've had kind of a front row seat on the evolution of the field of technical communication into like into the UX world, and all along the way you've been doing content strategy. But when did you start calling it content strategy?
Well, that's something that I think about and talk about with people all the time. I think the way that we use that label is something that is relatively lately that we've been using that term. But as you mentioned in kind of my introduction, I think of it as going back quite a long way in terms of the actual things that we do as part of content development, and then with a specialized look at what it means to provide strategy for that. I've always I realized that what was the robust field of technical communication goes back to the 40s and 50s when we had this huge burst of technology and needed to be able to communicate what was going on within various teams. And in my classes that I teach, I always like to bring up that famous novelists like Thomas Pynchon and science fiction novelist Ben Bova started as technical writers, doing mainly in the aeronautical industry, the defense industry, and then went into the creative side of things. So we have a long-standing background, and things like the importance of writing and visual design, audience analysis, task analysis, that kind of stuff's been around forever. Task analysis being one of those things that I really, I'm glad that was a part of my engineering background, because we had a strong grounding in that, fortunately. Things like I teach in the University of Washington's iSchool, which essentially was library science for about 90 years. And then around the year 2000, they rebranded it to recognize what's going on with digital products and services, and so I do appreciate kind of the arc of of the evolution of content strategy.
Well, it's one of and you just kind of highlighted a couple things that really interest me about the field. I think it's kind of a gathering spot for people from all kinds of different backgrounds who now share this common label. Like, you come out of the technical communication world. A lot of your students might have been librarians 20 years ago. A lot of people come from journalism, from marketing, from IT, and from technology fields. How among this, like your students at the UW in the iSchool, do most of them start from like how much are they about information? How much are they about technology? How much are they about writing? There's sort of like this swath of interests. Can we stereotype them, or do they come from all over the map?
Yeah, it's really all over, and even if you're just talking about my classes, there's different ones that have different constituencies. So there's undergraduate tech writing classes where it's mainly people in engineering needing to have a credit, a writing credit, and that happens to apply to what they're doing. And then there are some people that are primarily interested in going into interaction design, the user experience profession more broadly, and so that's a different sensibility. So it is. There are a lot of different places that people are coming from and wanting to go to. In terms of the class that I teach that are related to communication, there definitely tends to be the people that are coming from a journalism, creative writing background that want to get into technology area, and then there are people that are already in the technology area that want to explore being able to use their communication skills, and so there definitely is this interesting nexus there, and I think everybody can be successful. It's just a matter of recognizing that if you want to get involved in digital products and services, you have to enjoy technology, and if you're already a technologist, that there's a lot to learn about how to effectively communicate.
Right, and one of the it's interesting that that those are kind of the two main we talked about at the very start. Those are the two main ways that people come in, like from technology or writing, I'm wondering how the twain have met. Like, is there a new thing that's emerging from this this little melting pot at the iSchool? You're right there on the front lines watching this next generation of people. Is there like a new sort of articulation of this, or new way that people think about it? Or
well, yeah, there is, and I think as you see how content development has merged in with user experience, that there are new skill sets and sensibilities that are associated with that, where, for example, in the iSchool, people are definitely coming into that recognizing that important aspects are interactivity, creativity. One of my main clients that I work with, Blink UX, one of their important taglines is evidence-driven design. Being user advocates. Those are all extremely progressive aspects of designing digital products and services today that I don't think the traditional technical communication embrace necessarily as quickly as it could have or should have.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. That's one of those kind of connecting trends, I think, that's pulling things together in the middle, that evidence-basedness of things. I come out of like traditional publishing, and even in the early, and I think of I just looked back with horror at my publishing days and my early .com days, because we were all just know-it-alls, just making stuff up and doing it the way we'd always done it, and having some decent business results and stuff. But things are, to my mind, things are so much better now, that things are much more evidence-based. For example, user research in the UX field, having that as a core component of it. Is that Well, you go back. I want to kind of stitch this into your background a little bit, because you come out of the field that is widely known in the computer world as user assistance, like writing the manuals, providing the tutorials and all that stuff to help people use products. How has that kind of field morphed into and integrated with the UX and content strategy worlds? And I guess both for you personally and as a field.
Well, I'd already been doing technical communication for a while. Well, I'm old, but in the early '90s, as prominent companies like Microsoft were doing a lot of documentation related to their software products, that the term user assistant started to come out of organizations like that, which was a recognition of the idea that what they needed to provide had to be more comprehensive, a more multidisciplinary approach to what they were providing, and that the traditional printed manuals weren't necessarily going to be the future, but that it was even more than writing, that it was thinking about wizards, tutorials, interactive components within the software itself, so that you weren't going to external documentation. The idea of starting to bring in video content as that became possible through technology, and so user assistance was essentially taking it beyond saying that I'm writing manuals, recognizing that there are a lot of different parts to that, and I've always tried to bring that into my teaching for technical communicators, and so like in our syllabus, I have topics on that I'm always evolving on: video script writing, storytelling, usability testing, things which definitely wouldn't have been part of a traditional tech comm curriculum 25 years ago.
Right. All of a sudden, you're reminding me of one of the things that just kind of drives me nuts a little bit about our field is just the word content. It's kind of like, I don't know, too generic, too just impersonal. I don't know. But I think a lot of people early on, you just thought of content as words, lorem ipsum, the words that you dumped into a thing. But what you just rattled off a long list of different kinds of content that have helped people use software for a long time. And a lot of what you've talked to, I think virtually everything you talked about has now been kind of merged into what we think of as the UX field. That's something that's close to my heart, is this issue, of what it means for content. But just on a side thing, I've always felt like good software documentation, it has always hasn't quite gotten its due, because probably if you look at the last 25 years and you were able to like aggregate all of the software documentation that's ever been done, I would, without any data on it, I would say 95% of that has been written by people that have no interest in doing it, and is just something that needed to get done. And the people that do care about it will put together effective information. It's not always perfect, but there's that part of it, and then just the issue of what it means, what that word content means. I think that's something I reflect on a lot as well, because I still think that a granular attention to words and phrases and images is really that core connection with people in the moment and subconsciously, and a lot of wireframes. It's pretty common to see a placeholder that says content goes here. Yeah. Which doesn't have the underlying support or analysis of what really is going to go there. Who's the person that's going to be putting that content in there? Yep, that comes up over and over again, and I'm beginning to articulate in my head after this is the 26th. All of what you were just saying reminded me of one of the ways you describe your consulting practice is that you offer crafted communication. I want you to talk a little bit, because I think what you were just talking about kind of gets at that. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Yeah, I've always felt that although probably more projects than not that I work on now, I'm working at the levels of planning and strategy for comprehensive solutions, but I feel like I'm still an active practitioner, and it's important to me to in a project to get into what what actually is happening at that granular level, to get into the words, phrases, and images, to have a connection with the people in an organization that are the ones that will actually be developing that quote unquote content. And in projects, I don't feel like I can be effective at strategy if I don't put at least some time myself into the position of those content writers and crank some of that out. I'm always a little bit I'm always wonder a little bit about strategists that actually never kind of get into the trenches and make sure that their skills are still going in that area. And it's not that definitely the broader strategy area is different from the development of the content. I guess the bottom line is just that you always have a connection with what's actually going out to be consumed by your readers and viewers.
No, and that makes perfect sense to me, what you just said. I think so many, I don't know, I've even thought about this myself in my practice, like where, that dividing line between strategy and implementation, that you can't really draw that line. Like you were just saying, you've got to be jumping over that line, seeing how it's actually done so that you can craft a strategy that's informed by actual practice and experience.
I think it's it's at least important to stay a part of that. And and as you're developing strategies that may include publishing processes and technologies, to also understand what's possible for the staff that are in the organization that you're working with, to make sure that that really matches how they're going to be able to work on a day-to-day basis.
That kind of gets into one of the big overriding and overarching trends, and just in technology and life in general, is the relentless pace and acceleration of change. You're in a good position to keep on top of things. You run the Convey UX conference every year. You teach regularly. You're practicing. How do you keep on top of all that? And like what you were just saying, like for example, like keeping on top both of like your internal staff capabilities and what they can do and know, and then kind of all the technology possibilities that are out there.
Well, I mean, for me, I think I make it happen because I'm interested in technology. I like to apply time to keeping up with things, going to conferences that I'm not necessarily speaking at. Like this last week, watching the keynotes from the Windows Build conference, Google I/O, what Apple's doing, what comes out of the various technology organizations helps me. It just helps me, I think, keep relevant. But I mean, that's kind of separate from content strategy, which is just generally, I'm always telling my students that it's to their benefit to be open and always learning, and being ready to work with new ideas. I mean, that even comes into the area of mobile devices, where obviously that's become a ubiquitous part of our lives, but a lot of traditional technical communication still thinks about what they're presenting in the as being directly relevant to the large screen monitor that's on their corporate desk. And so I'm always trying to remind people that they have to shrink down that screen real estate and find out whether what they've been writing is still consumable, to even use technologies like we have built into Google Chrome, where you can resize the browser window so that you can immediately see what your treatise looks like on an iPhone, and it's dramatically different. I wrote a book 2010, and then a second one 2014, user assistance for mobile devices, and already the tech part of that book is completely out of date. But yeah, I wanted to explore the idea of what it means to write for small, and that brought up a lot of interesting design and writing challenges.
Yeah, and I think in some ways, I think somebody like Sarah Walker Betcher might argue that that's like just the first shot across the bow, that mobile responsiveness, that's the first example. And then you have voice interfaces coming, and chat bots, and that kind of use of content, and somebody's going to have to create that content, and I assume the strategists will have to strategize about it. There's so much need for content to be like portable, to be able to go like content everywhere is, I think that's the title of one of Sarah Walker Betcher's books. Is that, well, so you're sort of on top of teaching trends as well. Is that, how quickly does the curriculum at a place like the iSchool catch up to trends like mobile responsiveness and that kind of stuff?
Well, I guess there's two parts to that. One is that large-scale institutions, educational institutions, actually move really slowly in terms of rolling out new courses, but they're always working on it because that's their mission as well. And so it doesn't tend to react immediately, but hopefully instructors with progressive attitude are always bringing in the latest information into into what they're working on. So there's probably two sides to that part of it. But one of the talks that I do for some technical communication groups is how user assistance can fit well within modern user experience development environments. And a big part of that is understanding what skills you have that are completely relevant, but where you need to acquire new skills. And I show some examples of a course listing from contemporary times with one from even 10, 12 years ago, and it's dramatically different. So the universities, the good ones do evolve, and so the iSchool is a good example of one that is definitely right up there with the latest trends.
Yeah, and so much work now, or so much of the education now, at least, and I gather this is the case at the iSchool as well, is that so much of it is like actual hands-on project work, and they're probably going out and downloading the latest apps and software and gadgets and adopting practices that they read about, right?
Yeah, that's definitely the case. There's always new tools popping up, and unfortunately, a lot of software vendors are good about helping to provide us with extended and free licenses for some of the software for our students to be able to keep that relevant, because the university itself doesn't always have the ability to buy the latest tech.
Right. Yeah, I can only imagine. How many students are there at the iSchool? Is that a big program, or?
Well, it continues to grow, and so, for example, in any given quarter, one of the foundation courses, which is design thinking, has at least 4 or 5 sections of 25 to 30 students, and so the annual cohorts are pretty substantive.
Nice. Hey, one thing I noticed, we're coming up almost 25 minutes. One thing I definitely want to talk to you about is accessibility. That's an interest of yours, and I'm curious how your interest in accessibility relates to your role as a content strategist and how those interests overlap.
Well, my first exposure to accessibility was actually when I was a member. My company was a member of the World Wide Web Consortium back in 1998, and I wanted to get involved with some of the working groups, which essentially are where things like HTML, XML, cascading style sheets, originally came from. And what they were just rolling out at the time was the Web Accessibility Initiative, which came with authoring guidelines. So I got involved with that working group, which that whole program headed up by Judy Brewer at MIT. And so that was my first introduction with it. And then since then, I've tried to stay close to that and apply best practices as I can with the various projects I've been involved in. It's still a struggle, I think, to be able to get effective resources for most organizations to make sure that their digital products and services are available to people with various challenges. And right now I'm one of the co-organizers of the local Seattle Accessibility and Inclusive Design Meetup Group. And we have meetings every month, and just making sure that we're always trying to evangelize the idea about making sure that your content works with screen readers, attention to captioning, transcripts. An area that gets very little attention is being able to work with people with cognitive challenges, and there's just so much that we can do. And so I guess one of my biggest things in terms of wanting to evangelize accessibility is that to take it out of being a bottleneck where there's an accessibility person that audits, reviews, and adjusts content for it to be accessibility, and rather that everybody within content strategy, user experience, technical communication acquires the basic skills to be able to support their own work and make sure that they're not only meeting basic guidelines, but also trying to be innovative about how to develop their information so that all of us are able to consume that information.
Oh, so to not just comply, but to advance accessibility, like really make it. One thing about that just occurred, you gave some good ideas there, and the idea of like your evangelism work in that area, getting more people on board with the idea. I'm wondering also, though, if there's any, one of the benefits of being strategic, like a content strategist, is that you can bake stuff into a process earlier on. Have you found any I'm just trying to think like easy wins or things you can do early in a content strategy process to improve accessibility?
Well, one of the things that we always talk about is, first of all, to make these challenges visible. And so the first thing that you can do is make sure that there is recognition and empathy for what it means to people with various challenges to be able to have this built in. For someone working with a screen reader who's blind, if the underlying content code base is not well formed, that content essentially becomes invisible. If the architecture, the navigation of that content is not put together both technically and semantically in a good way, again, that information becomes either invisible or extremely difficult to be able to process. And so that's definitely the first place. And I think one of the cool things about today's content strategy is that it does look to the C-level of organizations to set the tone for what it means to do content strategy. And that plays well with accessibility, because setting that tone at that sea level then ends up allowing that to pour through into all the different departments that make up our products and services.
Well, that's great. So getting buy-in at this that high up, that makes perfect sense. It's better than just some lower level kind of implementation and enforcement thing, to actually have a culture that supports accessibility.
And then also promoting the idea that this is an area that's a new skill set, same as any other skills we may add to our toolkit, and that it's important for people to take the time and read a book, look at a website, go through some tutorials. There's a wealth of information about accessibility. There's just a huge amount in our world's knowledge base, and so one of the main things is for each of us to embrace that and bring it into our own work lives.
Nice. Well, good. Well, that's about all the time we've got today, Joe. I really want to thank you for taking the time to come on and talk with us today. Look at what's your I know you go to a lot of events and organize a lot of events. What's the next thing coming up here in Seattle?
Convey UX has been Seattle's main UX conference for the past 6 years, and so we'll be continuing to do that event. And we're also going to be, and that event is, I'm the program manager for that. That's produced by Blink UX, and that's going to be expanding to other parts of the country as well, with some specially themed content. And then I'm always still involved with user assistance and TechCom, and I'm going to be putting on an event in Raleigh, North Carolina, in association with the Department of English at North Carolina State. So still staying connected to kind of my love of technical writing as well.
I love that. The whole thing is looped back. We're right back to your English and engineering coming together. Right.
Yeah, I'm never going to let that go. I just enjoy it too much.
Nice. Well, thanks so much, Joe. Have a good one.
All right. Thanks a lot, Larry.
Thank you for listening. Tune in next week for another content strategy interview.